This is John Nugent.
I'm Sam Long.
And I'm Ron Peters.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. This is a third episode in the day for us. We did back-to-back episodes to bank a few for the summer because we'll be going different places. So if this seems less energetic than other ones, that's why. We'll do our best to bring the energy.
Yes, we will.
But you will not hear from us. I mean, you will hear from us, but you won't actually hear anything new from us for like weeks. And so we thought we'd tell you what we're going to be doing, and then when we come back, we'll tell you how it went.
Yeah.
How's that sound?
There you
Sounds
go.
good.
I'm leaving tomorrow for Arkansas, hanging out with some cousins for a few days, going to a MLS game, St. Louis versus Atlanta. So we're, hanging out by a creek. It'll be nice. It'll be blazing hot, so it's a cold creek, I hear, so I'm thankful for that.
Well, it's going to be hot around here, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. This week, at least, I'm not doing anything major. I got a little bit of work to do, and I'll be working out the farm. That's going to be my big thing. I got a lot of garden stuff that needs my attention, and so I'll be working out there. Going on a vacation next week with some of my guy friends, our annual getaway. So we're going to head out to West Michigan and hang out there for a few days. I'll hit the UP at some point for another trip, but those are kind of my big plans for the summer.
Yeah. With me, now we know my daughter Sierra's heart surgery is on August 8th. So that's what we needed to know to be able to plan our summer. And we're going to try to make a big all-family, like all of our kids and their husbands and grandkid trip to New York. Be with my family and try the New York pizza and swimming in the ocean and the bagels and
pizza.
Maybe a trip into cities, maybe catch a Yankees game. Boston is in town when we're going to be in town, and that's the rival. So that's the big trip, I think, that's happening. I think mostly things are staying local, maybe day trips to the beach, stuff like that, and minor house stuff, no big project ahead. So
Yeah, same here. No big projects, just a little bit here and there. Yeah.
Yeah, by the time you hear back from us, it's going to be like mid-July from our perspective.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, we hope you all have a great summer. But today we're going to wrap up our series on the Apocrypha. That gives us like 5 weeks to come up with another series. But we do hope you've enjoyed this little, foray into it. And some of you were, had a lot of just this gaping hole of knowledge of what these books are all about. And so if you've listened to all these episodes, you have the big picture of what happens in these books, what they're all about, and then more importantly, what they're not all about, like some myths and mysteries around the Apocrypha that there's crazy unorthodox Mary worship stuff going on, and these are not the books that tell you why Catholics and Protestants are different. It's like these books being in the Catholic canon and not the Protestant canon do not account for the differences in Protestant and Catholic theology and practice.
Right. I agree.
And if that's the only thing you get out of this, you've learned something important about these books. But hopefully you've gotten some insights that these books really do provide a lot of valuable background to reading the New Testament in its first century context.
Agreed.
So we're wrapping up with the book of Second Maccabees. Last week we read First Maccabees, and you might think that it's kind of like volume 2, picking up where the story left off. That it would be incorrect.
Yeah.
The relation between First and Second Maccabees is not like First and Second Kings, where it continues the story, or First and Second Chronicles that continues the story. It's more like the relationship that First and Second Kings have with First and Second Chronicles.
Yeah,
like it's a different telling of the same story from a different perspective. So if you read like Samuel and Kings, it's a very prophetic telling of Israel's history. When you read Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles, it's a very priestly telling of the same exact history.
Yeah.
And so there's just different emphasis, different concerns, a different writing style.
Yeah.
A different cadence to it. So Second Maccabees, to me, like First Maccabees is like telling the facts. Like here are the different Maccabean sons, and this is how they delivered the Jewish people from the Greeks, and how they lost battles and were replaced by a brother, and and just it really covers the history. And it's more like just the facts, kind of just moving through it the way Kings does, right? Samuel and Kings. But Second Maccabees is kind of more like Chronicles. It's more likely to slow down and go into detail, almost like the difference of reading the Gospel of Mark, which is very just fact-driven, and then reading the Gospel of John, which just slows down and reflects and goes into detail. So Second Maccabees is like color commentary of the events of First Maccabees. but doesn't cover nearly as much ground. And so Second Maccabees is all about the time of Judas Maccabeus. It doesn't get into his brothers and what happens afterwards. Doesn't get into when the high priesthood gets involved with the Maccabean family. So some say this is actually a rival kind of view. It's like very high on Judas and what he accomplished in freeing the temple specifically, and setting us up for the practice of Hanukkah. And this, remember how Esther is kind of a book that, like, here's the backstory of why we celebrate the Festival of Purim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This book is kind of like, here's the backstory of why the Jewish people celebrated the Festival of Lights. They celebrate Hanukkah.
Yeah.
And there's actually 2 prefaces that basically say that to the Jews in Egypt. I'm going to tell you a story of why we should celebrate this festival. We're doing it here in Palestine. You should do it there in Egypt.
Right.
And there's a double preface, and both of them end with, and this is why you should do Hanukkah. This is why you should celebrate this festival at this time of year. And in the middle of the book, there's another thing on the festival and how it was established in chapter 10. So all signs are pointing to, we're telling you enough of the story so that you would want to celebrate this.
Yeah.
But the perspective of this book, it's kind of, where First Maccabees is like these righteous Jewish people who rise up and it's like righteous revolutionary violence. The battles are justified. The alliances were justified. All the things that these were all necessary to get a certain amount of Jewish autonomy in Palestine. It's like an apologetic for the Hasmonean project.
Yeah.
And when you read First Maccabees, there's not a whole lot of God in it.
Yeah.
It was just not told from and God did this and God did that.
Right, yeah.
Second Maccabees is very much a God story. It's kind of like these battles that Judas won were won because the Lord was with him and fighting. There's certainly that belief in First Maccabees.
Oh, yeah, it's there.
But this book is more like holy war. These are holy war battles that God did the fighting for the people, and not military people connived and strategized and used good tactics.
Right, yeah.
And First Maccabees kind of focused on human tactics and strategies of how the Jews gained control of the land. This one is how God worked to ultimately to purge his temple that had been defiled, and his greatest victories were won through the martyrs who gave their life rather than compromise. The people who gave it all for faithfulness to Torah. It's their deaths that move the story forward, and that get God fighting for the Jewish people, fighting for his temple to get it liberated from Greek defilement.
Yep.
So it's kind of a smaller snapshot. It focuses a lot more color commentary. And it comes with a cool little compiler preface. I do want to read that. It's in chapter 2, 19, and we saw this a couple of books ago. Was it in Sirach, where he kind of talks about, I'm doing a translation and learn a little bit about the translation process. This is kind of like that too. So from the author, it says this in chapter 2, beginning verse 19. The story of Judas Maccabeus and his brothers, and the purification of the greatest temple, and the dedication of the altar, and further the wars against Antiochus Epiphanes and his son Eupator, and the appearances that came from heaven to those who fought bravely for Judaism, so that though few in number, they seized the whole land, and pursued the barbarian hordes, and regained possession of the temple, famous throughout the world, and liberated the city, and reestablished the laws that were about to be abolished, while the Lord with great kindness became gracious to them. All this, which has been set forth by Jason of Cyrene in 5 volumes, we shall attempt to condense into a single book. We don't have access to this Jason of Cyrene project. Wish we did.
I know, right?
Just the Reader's Digest condensed volumes that word.
That's what it's saying. So for considering the flood of lines written and the difficulty there is for those who wish to enter upon the narratives of history because of the massive material, we have aimed to please those who wish to read, to make it easy for those who are inclined to memorize, and to profit all readers. For us who have undertaken the toil of abbreviating, it is no light matter, but calls for sweat and loss of sleep, just as it is not easy for one who prepares a banquet and seeks the benefit of others. Nevertheless, To secure the gratitude of many, we will gladly endure the uncomfortable toil, leaving the responsibility for exact details to the compiler, while devoting our effort to arriving at the outlines of the condensation. For as the master builder of a new house must be concerned with the whole construction, while the one who undertakes its painting and decoration has to consider only what is suitable for its adornment. Such, in my judgment, is the case with us. It is the duty of the original historian to occupy the ground, to discuss the matters from every side, and to take trouble with the details. But the one who recasts the narrative should be allowed to strive for brevity of expression and to forego exhaustive treatment. At this point, therefore, let us begin our narrative without adding any more to what has already been said, for it would be foolish to lengthen the preface while cutting short the history itself.
Amen.
That is a lot of throat clearing at the beginning of this book.
And like so many long sentences, run-ons, and
so much for brevity.
Yes.
I should get to the end of the book. At the end of chapter 15, he has like a final compiler comment. If it is going to verse 37. This then is how matters turned out with Nicanor, and from that time the city has been in possession of the Hebrews. So I will here end my story. If it is well told and to the point, that is what I myself desired. If it is poorly done and mediocre, that was the best I could do. For just as it is harmful to drink wine alone, or again to drink water alone, while wine already mixed with water is delicious and enhances one's enjoyment, so also the style of the story delights the ears of those who read the whole work. And here will be the end.
Finally.
Oh, my God.
You know, I wonder if students submitted and said, hey, I hope it's good enough, but it's the best I can do.
I've had students say that to me, but I've never seen it in their paper.
Yeah. I like reading that. I like beginning with that because it gives you a sense this guy is trying to entertain. He's trying to tell a story. He's like the frilly details, right? He's not just trying to be objective and get it from all sides. He's just being fully transparent. I'm condensing a lot of work. I'm going to leave stuff out, but I'm going to tell a great story, and you're going to enjoy it, and I hope you like what I've done with it.
Love it.
You will love it.
Yeah. So, and as we talked about earlier, it's the story of how the temple gets defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes, and how through Judas, mostly Judas, I don't think Mattathias gets raised in this book. Like Judas is the hero in the center of it all. Like it gets liberated, and there are battles, and there are martyrs who pave the way for the great liberation that happens. But there's a story, because part of the apologetic of the book is how in the world did a mere human enter the temple precincts and defile the tabernacle? Not the tabernacle. Well, yeah, the temple.
Yeah.
And so in the early part of the story, he tells the story of Heliodorus, which is an earlier attempt to take stuff out of the sanctuary and why it failed.
Okay.
So we'll start with that one.
Sure. This is in chapter 3, starting verse 22. And while they were calling upon the Almighty Lord that he would keep what had been entrusted safe and secure for those who entrusted it, Heliodorus went on with what had been decided. But when he arrived at the treasury with his bodyguard, then and there the sovereign of spirits and of all authority caused so great a manifestation that all who had been so bold as to accompany him were astounded by the power of God and became faint with terror. For there appeared to them a magnificently caparisoned horse with a rider of frightening mien. It rushed furiously at Heliodorus and struck at him with its front hoofs. Its rider was seen to have armor and weapons of gold. 2 young men also appeared with him, remarkably strong, gloriously beautiful, and splendidly dressed, who stood on either side of him and flogged him continuously, inflicting many blows on him. When he suddenly fell to the ground and deep darkness came over him, his men took him up, put him on a stretcher, and carried him away. This man, who had just entered the aforesaid treasury with a great retinue and all his bodyguard, but was now unable to help himself, they recognized clearly the sovereign power of God.
So God protects his own treasury.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah, so here was a guy who was basically commanded by his overseer, like, hey, there's money that I know that's in that Jerusalem sacred. And, it wasn't just a holy place. It was a place of sanctuary.
Yeah.
You can keep, it's like a bank. You can keep money here safely, and no one's going to touch it.
Right.
Well, the emperor wants his money, and so he's going to send someone to get it. Heliodor is sent and experiences awful heavenly manifestation.
It's hilarious.
Well, and temples were frequently banks in the ancient world. I mean, it's not just the Jerusalem temple. There are a lot of temples that also served as banks, so it's not an uncommon thing. But I like how God watches over his own. That's the whole point of this. Is like, the emperor can say, I want the money, and God's like, you can want anything you want, buddy. I'm going to take care of my stuff here. And he does. God protects his own.
I love the two helpers who just flog continuously.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. They're just coming and beating the dude.
Heavenly
That's entertainment.
Floggers. Yeah, and so this is just setting up the story. Like, this is before Antiochus is successfully able to rob it. And it's partly an apologetic. Like, how were the Greeks able to pillage the temple? Well, not because God is weak.
Right.
Like, when God is protecting his people in his temple, this is what happens. But when God's people are not faithful to God and he wants to discipline and punish them, then someone like Antiochus can move in there and take stuff because it's divine punishment. So when God's fighting for his people in place, there's no one who can touch his stuff. When he withdraws his presence because he wants to discipline his people, that's the only situation in which the temple can be defiled.
Yeah. Moving ahead, the temple does get defiled. They do
Spoiler.
come in. Yeah, I'll let you know. They do come in. The Jews are, there's an attempt to suppress Judaism. And, we begin getting into some really interesting stories in Second Maccabees about the heroes of Judaism. It's not just Judas. It's not just the hammer. But there are other people who emerge as heroes. And really the kind of the glory that's associated with martyrdom. And so in chapter 6, verse 18, we're going to read about Eleazar, one of the scribes in a high position, a man now advanced in age and of noble presence. He was being forced to open his mouth to eat pig's flesh. But he, welcoming death with honor rather than life with pollution, went up to the rack of his own accord, spitting it out as all ought to go, who have the courage to refuse things that it is not right to taste, even for the natural love of life. Those who were in charge of that unlawful sacrifice took the man aside because of their long acquaintance with him and privately urged him to bring meat of his own providing, proper for him to use, and to pretend that he was eating the flesh of the sacrificial meal that he had been commanded to eat by the king, so that by doing this he might be saved from death and be treated kindly on account of his old friendship with them. But making a high resolve, worthy of his years and the dignity of his old age, and the gray hairs that he had reached with distinction, and his excellent life, even from childhood, and moreover, according to the holy God-given law, he declared himself quickly, telling them to send him to Hades. Such pretense is not worthy of our time of life, he said, for many of the young might suppose that Eleazar in his 90th year had gone over to a foreign way of life, and through my pretense, for the sake of living a brief moment longer, they would be led astray because of me, while I defile and disgrace my old age. Even if for the present I would avoid the punishment of mortals, yet whether I live or die, I will not escape the hands of the Almighty. Therefore, by bravely giving up my life now, I will show myself worthy of my old age, and leave to the young a noble example of how to die a good death, willingly and nobly, for the revered and holy laws. When he said this, he was dragged at once to the rack. Those who had little before had acted towards him with goodwill now changed to ill will, because the words he had uttered were, in their opinion, sheer madness. When he was about to die under the blows, he groaned aloud and said, "It is clear to the Lord in his holy knowledge that, though I might have been saved from death, I am enduring terrible sufferings in my body under this beating, but in my soul I am glad to suffer these things, because I fear him." So here's a man who willingly, even at the end of his life, says, I would rather die, and I will gladly accept whatever evil they put on me, because I know that God is going to honor me. And it makes me think of like what Mattathias said in the previous, First Maccabees, those who desire honor, will be zealous for the law. Here's a man who is so zealous for the law that he would rather suffer and die rather than corrupted. And he wants to be an example to the young, to say, if I'm willing to do this, you can do it too.
Yeah. It's like a case study in how to be the opposite of a sellout.
Right.
Big time.
As I was hearing, I was thinking a little bit of Stephen, everyone turning against him and, beating him and all the rest. But yeah, I love it so much. Our life is worth more than this pretense. I'm not going to fake, eating something just to save my life. It's very, and his reasoning is great because, like, even if I do that and save my life, people are going to look on it and like, oh, so we can do that too. And like, that's great. You got to lead by example, and we're not going to sell out just to save my life.
Yeah, that's some serious moral reflection.
Yep,
agree, totally agree.
And he avoids the legalistic. I'm just giving the appearance of doing it, but I'm not really doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just think about where people are today with moral reflection, and we're not so noble as this guy.
Correct.
So, this is followed by another martyrdom story, and that one seems to have the Hades thing, like send me to Hades where I'm going to die. And there's he doesn't express any future hope. He's more concerned with his example for future generations. So you might think that this book doesn't have much view of afterlife, and you don't have one in First Maccabees. Right. But the next story, chapter 7, makes clear that the author of Second Maccabees has afterlife hope. It's a long chunk.
It's a long chunk.
But it's really important. So here we go. It happened also that 7 brothers and their mother were arrested and were being compelled by the king under torture with whips and straps to partake of unlawful pig's flesh. One of them, acting as their spokesman, said, "What do you intend to ask and learn from us? For we are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of our ancestors." The king fell into rage and gave orders to have pans and cauldrons heated. These were heated immediately, and he commanded that the tongue of their spokesman be cut out, and they scalp him and cut off his hands and feet, while the rest of the brothers and the mother looked on. When he was utterly helpless, the king ordered them to take him to the fire, still breathing, and to fry him in a pan. The smoke from the pan spread widely, but the brothers and their mother encouraged one another to die nobly, saying, "The Lord God is watching over us, and in truth has compassion on us, as Moses declared in his song that bore witness against the people to their faces when he said, 'And he will have compassion on his servants.'" After the first brother had died in this way, they brought forward the second for their sport. They tore off the skin of his head with the hair and asked him, "Will you eat rather than have your body punished limb by limb?" He replied in the language of his ancestors and said to them, "No." Therefore he, in turn, underwent tortures as the first brother had done. And when he was at his last breath, he said, "You accursed wretch, you dismiss us from this present life, but the King of the universe will raise us up to a renewal of everlasting life, because we have died for his laws." After him, the third was the victim of their sport. When it was demanded, he quickly put out his tongue and courageously stretched forth his hands and said nobly, "I got these from heaven, and because of his laws I disdain them, and from him I hope to get them back again." As a result, the king himself and those who were with him, astonished at the young man's spirit, were astonished, for he regarded his sufferings as nothing. After he too had died, they maltreated and tortured the fourth in the same way. When he was near death, he said, "One cannot but choose to die at the hands of mortals, and to cherish the hope God gives of being raised again by him. But for you there will be no resurrection to life." Next they brought forward the fifth and maltreated him. But he looked at the king and said, "Because you have authority among mortals, though you also are mortal, you do what you please. But do not think that God has forsaken our people. Keep on and see how his mighty power will torture you and your descendants." After him they brought forward the sixth, and when he was about to die, he said, "Do not deceive yourself in vain, for we are suffering these things on our own account because of our sins against our own God. But do not think that you will go unpunished for having tried to fight against God." The mother was especially admirable and worthy of honorable memory. Although she saw her 7 sons perish within a single day, she bore it with good courage because of her hope in the Lord. She encouraged each of them in the language of their ancestors. Filled with a noble spirit, she reinforced her woman's reasoning with a man's courage and said to them, "I do not know how you came into being in my womb. It was not I who gave you life and breath, nor I who set in order the elements within each of you. Therefore, the Creator of the world, who shaped the beginning of humankind and devised the origin of all things, in his mercy gives life and breath back to you again, since you now forget yourself for the sake of the laws. I'll stop there. It goes on. And the woman, like, even tells her last son, you know, she kind of like, you know, if you got to compromise, you got to compromise a little bit. But then, no, he, like, stands firm and to the end are faithful in martyrdom. And so this story is like a classic statement of, again, like Eleazar being faithful. But here are young people who are being faithful to the point of death. And their concern is not just their reputation. They have hope in the resurrection.
Yeah, very clearly
and it's
stated.
a very bodily resurrection. Like, I'm going to get my body parts back.
Yeah.
You can take them away, but you can't take away from me eternal life.
Yeah, I like that. And it's in the intertestamental period that the hope of the resurrection becomes more of a focus. And I think that's at least in part due to the fact that you're in a time period where people are suffering for being righteous. They're not suffering for their sins, although one of the brothers does say we kind of brought this on ourselves. But there's still this sense of you are persecuting us because we're striving to be faithful to God. And, you know, in Torah, faithfulness to God means you're going to overcome your enemies and be, you know, delivered and all that. And now it's like, well, this isn't quite what Torah said. But resurrection theology says there's still hope. You know, that because we're being faithful to God, when it happens, we're going to be part of that you know, blessed experience. And so it's still this optimism, this sense of God's going to take care of us, even beyond the grave.
It's interesting that the bodily resurrection is like a perfected body, though. Like, it's restoring the things that were lost from them. That's, I don't know. It's weird to go back and forth thinking about that, because when you got Jesus who's resurrected, he still had his, you know, holes in his body. But I don't know. It's just kind of their thinking, like how they're putting this all together. Like, yeah, we're gonna be resurrected. It's gonna be just like this, but better, or like perfect. I don't know. It's kind of.
I guess it makes sense though. Like, you know, for those who have been dead for hundreds of years, you know, maybe even their bones are gone.
Yeah.
When they come back, they got to come back as, you know, a restored body in some way. So, cut my hands off. God can't. That's not a problem to the Creator. Yeah.
Yeah, resurrection is a key theme in this book. It's going to show up again in a key spot, and it's going to be talked about a little bit. But it's definitely not a you die and go to heaven. That's not their hope, and it's compatible with what Eleazar said. Like, you can die and send me to Hades, but I'm going to get. But the sons would say, but I'm going to get these back in the resurrection.
Yeah.
And so probably the author doesn't think the Hades thing is in tension with the resurrection thing.
Right.
It's probably Hades is the resting place of the dead
Yep.
before the resurrection happens, and they get bodies back.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea of just rest. You know, we're going to go, we're going to be spared from all these evil things, but it's a temporary situation. Resurrection.
I could use a nap.
What's that?
I could use a nap.
Good nap. Good long nap.
Yeah, the way this story ends in verse 41, it says, "Last of all, the mother died after her sons. Let this be enough then about the eating of sacrifices and the extreme tortures."
Yeah. We've had our fill.
Yeah, so he's trying to, like, I'm going to give you a couple of case studies about just how gruesome this all got.
Yeah.
Just to let you know of the kind of hope that God backs and accredits with the resurrection.
Yeah.
So that's a cool part. You know, there's a brief little passage I'm going to read, and then we'll zoom in on another passage that's key for kind of Maccabean theology. So Antiochus Epiphanes, I mean, he's overseeing all this stuff, right? And he's the ringleader. He's the one causing the tortures. But at the end of the day, God tortures him.
Yeah.
And he receives his judgment. And actually, according to this book, regrets what he did. And so in chapter 9, verse 12, "And when he could not endure his own stench," because this thing happened with him where God gave him this incurable disease and his bowels were like torturing him on the inside, right? So like, and then he came to smell so that no one even wanted to be around him. It's kind of like Job, right? So when he could not endure his own stench, he uttered these words: "It is right to be subject to God. Mortals should not think that they are equal to God." And so you have this kind of last confession that he makes, and this is followed by verses where he makes a promise to God and kind of uplifts the God of Israel. But it's kind of a reversal of fortunes. The guy who was the arrogant one who thought he was God, he was Antiochus Epiphanes, God manifest. At the end of his life, he's like, yeah, that was wrong. I shouldn't do that.
Learn my lesson.
All right, we'll turn to chapter 12. It's going to talk about something kind of interesting. I won't preview it. We'll just read it and see what it says. Starting verse 38, Then Judas assembled his army and went to the city of Adullam, and the seventh day was coming. They purified themselves according to the custom and kept the Sabbath there. On the next day, as had now become necessary, Judas and his men went to take up the bodies of the fallen and to bring them back to lie with their kindred in the sepulchres of their ancestors. Then under the tunic of each one of the dead they found sacred tokens of the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. And it became clear to all that this was the reason these men had fallen. So they all blessed the ways of the Lord, the righteous judge, who reveals the things that are hidden. And they turned to supplication, praying that the sin that had been committed might be wholly blotted out. The noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves free from sin, for they had seen with their own eyes what had happened as the results of the sin of those who had fallen. He also took up a collection, man by man, to the amount of 2,000 drachmas of silver, and sent it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering. In doing this, he acted very well and honorably, taking account of the resurrection. For if he were not expecting that those who had fallen would rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he was looking to the splendid reward that is laid up for those who fall asleep in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Therefore, he made atonement for the dead, so they might be delivered from their sin. Now, this is very purgatory-ish type idea, right?
Yeah.
Where someone can be prayed for or even atoned for in the while they wait for the resurrection. And of course, we don't necessarily believe in that, but that is that's just fascinating. That like he saw they committed the sin, and he was going to offer the guilt offering in order to sort of atone for it.
Yeah, kind of post-mortem atonement for these characters. And it's a fascinating passage because, again, it reinforces this idea of the resurrection. They're concerned for their resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they died as sinners, but we still want to hope that they have a good resurrection. It was a couple of years ago, one of my students actually brought this up and said, I wonder if this relates to baptism for the dead, you know, that we see in 1 Corinthians 15. Not that Paul's endorsing that, but there might be people who are baptizing on behalf of the dead because they were familiar with this story and said, well, if Judas offered up sacrifices for these fallen comrades, maybe there's something we can do for our fallen friends or family members to ensure that they have a good resurrection. You know, so again, some interesting connections there.
Yeah, this is the closest thing you really have to what ends up being a Catholic doctrine, the doctrine of purgatory, that, you know, we all die with the sin that we've accrued, and like there's a time in purgatory where our sin gets worked off. And during certain kind of corruptions of this theology, you know, people who were alive could like do things like make offerings to build cathedrals, right? And cover church expenses, and that would like help, you know, work off time in purgatory for their dead parent or whatever. That's not quite what is being said here. I think this is not really a passage that says we die in sin and have to work it off before we can be resurrected, but it's more saying Judas obviously believed in the resurrection, or else why would he try to like say, God, please don't hold the sin of my armies against them. In a moment of weakness before they died, they took some idol stuff that they shouldn't. And he just, if anything, this argues that the living can intercede, or at least Judas thought he could intercede on behalf of his men after they had died, just to make a case for God, like, you know, please take this into account before you judge my men and find them worthy of eternal condemnation.
Yeah.
So it's not quite purgatory, right?
Right.
Like it's not a basis for that, but it is. But it does have a doctrine that we don't see anywhere else in Scripture, except maybe that Pauline resurrection, people being baptized.
Yeah.
Like the notion that someone besides Jesus could do something for you, right, after you've died. But like for Christians, like we have the book of Hebrews, like he died once and for all.
Yeah.
Right. And so there doesn't need to be any purification made for people who have died or whatever. Like that is once and for all. But if you're Jews who believe in the resurrection and you don't really have a temple anymore and you don't know about Jesus' once and for all death, they could think that, maybe if humans can intercede for one another while they're still alive, like pray for one another, forgive one another, right? Like restore a brother in their sin. Like if there's a future life, why can't we intercede for those who are dead? Like, you can see how that could follow from Jewish convictions. As Christians, we would have a hard time based on Hebrews going that direction, but to see why resurrection is kind of a new thought to people in this time period, and they're just wrestling with what that means and whether there's something the living can do on behalf of the dead.
Right. And I think it shows the kind of love and concern that they have. I love these people. I want to do something on their behalf. I don't want to think it's over for them because they made a bad decision at the end of their lives.
Yeah. We don't see a lot of this in the intertestamental period. Like this is like a one-off weird passage.
Yeah. Agree.
And I don't see that the early or the Jewish people did anything with it to build upon it.
Right.
But maybe, like you said in First Corinthians, when Paul says about, why, if you don't believe in the resurrection, why do people get baptized for the dead?
Yeah.
And that seems to be like this passage. Like, if he didn't believe in the resurrection, then why would he do this offering to atone for his dead army?
Yeah, and it's very explicit. He's doing it because he believes in resurrection.
Yeah.
And so, I think it helps. There's a strong chance that it informs our understanding of that weird passage in 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah, at least the logic behind what people may have been doing.
Yeah.
And neither this author or the other said that offering was effective.
Right.
That God answered his prayer and therefore decided to save her. Like, we don't know what God's take on it is. We just know that Judas's actions reflected his theology of resurrection.
Yeah. Yep. We have one more story, a martyr story that we really wanted to make sure that we got in here because it's a fascinating story about a man named Razis. 2 Maccabees chapter 14, beginning verse 37, says, excuse me, a certain Razis, one of the elders of Jerusalem, was denounced to Nicanor as a man who loved his compatriots and was very well thought of, and for his goodwill was called Father of the Jews. For before the day of separation he had been accused of Judaism, and he had most zealously risked body and life for Judaism. Nicanor, wishing to exhibit the enmity that he had for the Jews, sent more than 500 soldiers to arrest him, for he thought that by arresting him, he would do them an injury. When the troops were about to capture the tower and were forcing the door of the courtyard, they ordered that fire be brought and the doors be burned. Being surrounded, Razis fell upon his own sword, preferring to die nobly rather than to fall into the hands of sinners and suffer outrages unworthy of his noble birth. But in the heat of the struggle, he did not hit exactly, and the crowd was now rushing in through the doors. He courageously ran up on the wall and threw himself down into the crowd. But as they quickly drew back, a space opened and he fell in the middle of the empty space. Still alive and aflame with anger, he arose. And though his blood gushed forth and his wounds were severe, he ran through the crowd and standing upon a steep rock, with his blood now completely drained from him, he tore out his entrails, took them in both hands, and hurled them at the crowd, calling upon the Lord of life and spirit to give them back to him again. This was the manner of his death. Oh my God. I just pulling out your own guts and throwing them at people. Oh my gosh. That is like one of the best martyr stories I think I've ever read in my entire life.
That's pretty good. He was very passionate about dying. He really was all about it.
Yeah, all about his own death. Here's a stomach. Here's a little bit of intestine, just throwing them at people.
It's this tragic account. He tried to take his life, but he missed.
Yeah.
And so it's like, all right, I will jump off this high place and land on. Presumably the crowd is like the Greeks who are trying to kill him.
Right. Yeah.
He doesn't want. So he's like, I can at least land on a bunch of them and hurt some people, like Samson on the way down, collapsing the tower, and they all move out of the way, and he hits the ground, and that's not enough to kill him. He stands up and rips out his guts and throws it at. Oh my goodness! When students read this, I remember James Jackson said, "Man, this guy is so metal."
He's so metal. That's a James Jackson quote to a T.
Yeah. And so what we've done here with Second Maccabees is just giving you some snippets.
Yeah.
I mean, the storyline is the storyline you got from First Maccabees.
Yeah.
Antiochus comes and he persecutes the Jews, but it's trying to answer theological questions.
Yep.
How did God let that happen? Was Antiochus stronger than God? No.
Right.
When God wants to deliver the temple, he sends his holy horses and whip men
Right. Yeah.
and flogs people. Like, it's because they disgraced the priesthood and defiled the priesthood that God allowed that temple to be defiled, because without God protecting the temple, it's just a bunch of bricks.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And then here are the stories of the martyrs, and there are stories of the battles of Judas and his men who eventually cleansed the temple. There's going to zoom in a lot in chapter 10, 1 through 9, to talk about how the temple was purified, and that becomes ultimately the purpose of the book.
Yeah.
Right, is to say this is the event where God delivered his people from the Greeks. But his story goes on, and they go to subdue the land and fight battles, and the story kind of ends toward the end of the time period of Judas's reign. So, like I said, color commentary. And this is an author who's trying to be creative and entertain, and so I think these stories are funny on purpose.
Yeah, they are entertaining without a doubt. No question about it.
But they are also, like, theologically rich.
Yeah.
So with our last 5 minutes, we're kind of wrapping up this series on the Apocrypha. Thought we could just spend some time reflecting. I don't know, any big picture observations, having kind of worked through all these books, that you would make about the Apocrypha in general.
I like I've mentioned this in the previous episodes, but like the creative license that they felt they had to take characters and events and to sort of shape them to say something, either theologically or about their history. And there's no, the fact that these books continue to exist and there's no seemingly pushback against it, like that's perfectly acceptable for them. And so I like that. I like that license they did have, and I think it teaches us a lot about kind of where the development of their theology throughout that time. Like you said, the 400 years of silence were clearly not silent, and how do you get from where they were at kind of in the middle 500s to 400s to Jesus, and like what happened? Like there seems to be, I wouldn't say a disjunct, but something has happened. Right? There's been some movement, especially when you talk about things like heaven and hell and other spiritual type things. Like where did that all come from? And the answer is here,
Yep.
right? And so I think it's really I say that if you want to understand the New Testament, you need to understand the Old Testament. I would say it wouldn't hurt to understand also the Apocrypha to really get into what's going on in the New Testament as well.
Yeah, I would really affirm that. I think that the more you study these works, the more the New Testament just makes sense.
Yeah.
It gives you a sense of historical and theological context that, when you see the attitudes of especially the pious, I've said it in other moments, but the Pharisees, the Essenes, the Zealots, like where did they get their ideas from? Well, they got their ideas from their histories and the stories that they told about their histories and the interpretation of those historical events. And I think that's one of the reasons I was excited about us doing this series, is because I want our listeners to hear this stuff. And I would encourage people to go back and read it for yourself so you have an even deeper understanding. And then go back and read the Gospels and then read Paul and go, man, these people just make a lot more sense to me. And you don't always have to agree with them, but you can at least understand how they arrived at the positions that they were in. And I think listen with a much more sympathetic ear to some of the arguments that some of the people are making. They're still opposed to God. God wants them to think like he's thinking. But I think I'm more sympathetic to how they arrived at the positions that they were in.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all that. And I would only say that I think for people reading these books, I try to read it sympathetically.
Yeah.
Like, read it on its own terms. Like, even like this book, that had some weird stuff about, making atonement for dead people.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's descriptive, not necessarily prescriptive.
Right.
Right? Like, it's describing that. Like, this guy, like, killed himself. That doesn't really say, like, therefore suicide is okay. Like, like, a lot of these books they're descriptive. I don't think they're always prescriptive. If you judge them as being, well, if I have a reason to think this isn't exactly what happened historically, then I can't trust it. Then you're kind of missing the point of reading this. Read it like you would read an ancient book on its own terms for what it's trying to do. And I think some of these books do entertain, and some of them do inspire. Like the example of martyrs, like their courage, like This comes really close, this book, to a kind of Pauline theology of suffering.
Yeah.
Like that
For
you
real.
see in the New Testament. Like, our suffering is not in vain.
Yeah.
Our suffering accomplishes something. And you don't get a lot of that in the Old Testament.
Yeah, you're right.
And Paul seems to be building. Paul didn't make it up, right? He attached the sufferings to the sufferings of Christ, not to the sufferings of Eleazar, right?
Right. Yeah.
But the notion that God is moved by our suffering, He can do something with it. You get that from a book like Second Maccabees,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think it's an interesting collection. It's a diverse collection.
Yeah.
There's some stuff in it that there's just nothing like it in the Old or New Testament.
No doubt.
And I find it to be, I don't know, informative. To me, I like these books. I don't consider them scripture. I don't consider them inspired. I do find them useful in the ways that Sam said.
Yeah, agreed.
I just have better eyes to read what's in the New Testament because I've read these books.
Amen.
I just see things I wouldn't see otherwise.
And I'd say, and even not just, it could be edifying too. In the same way, like if you were to read like Max Lucado, who does the same sort of thing. He takes a biblical story and then embellishes it, and people have loved those for decades, right? I think you see that at times here, where like when they say a prayer, like yes, that's a prayer, the type of prayer I should be praying, and so it's not just educational. It can be edifying if you understand it on its terms, not as inspiration, but as someone who's reflecting on what God has done in the past for His people.
Well, and I think about like a modern example, The Chosen is a very popular series right now. A lot of Christians love it. There are some Christians who don't like it because they're taking liberties or whatever. And people took liberties, I'm not saying that The Chosen is inspired. We shouldn't hold it up as the Bible or something like that. But it doesn't mean it's not doing a good thing. It can't be inspirational in some way and creating space for good conversations. And so I think modern people can do these things. And if we understand them in their proper context, then I think we're going to be far more sympathetic to what they're trying to do.
Yeah. I guess my last comment would just be, I think they do show us that there's a great deal of diversity within Judaism during this time period. People who believe in the resurrection, and it's like the basis of their actions.
Yeah.
People who stay faithful without the hope of the resurrection. And God's purposes in history is the basis of their actions. People who are, using righteous revolutionary violence, and human strategy and tactics. And then other people who are like, no, human strategies always lead to bad things, but it's like God miraculously intervening and doing stuff. Like, there's just a variety in here. And I think we have to, I don't think when we see this variety, we just say, so pick the one you like the best. I'm going to be a non-resurrection person.
Sure.
You can be a resurrection person. I think as Christians, what do we do with these books? I think we read them in light of Jesus, who is the definitive revelation of God. Like he clarifies what from this heritage and tradition and this literary corpus kind of gets folded into his story and salvation history, and what themes and tropes he does not pick up and run with, does not endorse and do more with. I think you can allow Jesus to do the filtering of what from this is good for edification and instruction, and what for this maybe we should leave behind.
Yeah.
Jesus is the standard.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So I think that's how we move forward.
Amen.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode and series of the After Class podcast, After Class because
the best conversations happen
after class.
Thank you again for listening to the After Class podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Audio production is provided by Drew Nyquist, and social media is managed by Darren Harris.